Well, it was not the day or the week for data centers. The City County Council basically approved a moratorium on data centers that was followed by the Metropolitan Development Commission, a moratorium while they figure out the rules and regulations. So we're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. So join us on the news line is Michael Paul Hart, City County Councilor, and also with a tech background, understands data centers as well as anybody else does. So Michael, my friend, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to chat with you.
Always a pleasure to be here and happy to talk about data centers with you.
All righty, so help our audience out here explain what happened with the council and explain what happened with the Metropolitan Development Commission. Because some folks will think, hey, if the council said it, then they should be done and that should be it.
Yeah, what's really interesting is the longer scope of events. Everybody seems to be focused on the last full council meeting and then this most recent Metropolitan Development Commission meeting. But it actually goes back farther than this. In fact, the city council leadership is the group that asked the city Department of Metropolitan Development to come up with a set of standards for data centers. And that original request came months ago. I want to say maybe 4 or 5 months ago, even, because we were starting to see more and more of these type of developments come to the city. And so the city obliged. They said, sure. And they went and they hired a company to help them. Put all of this together, and they did community meetings. They did them in person, did them virtually, and then they put together and partnered with the MDC to put together the first package of development standards for data centers for zoning use. And again, that was still 2 months ago that those first came out. That first set of standards came out, and then it was the first Metropolitan Development committee meeting that we had as a council. We had the opportunity to review that. And our responsibility was to review anything that they had suggested, and either we were going to approve it, deny it, or amend it. And what happened is the city council leadership, Maggie Lewis specifically, came out to me out of the blue. I didn't know it was going to happen. And she just basically said, we're doing a moratorium on data centers. So instead of having a set of development standards, she said that she wanted to amend it to say, let's have a moratorium in the city of Indianapolis for any new zoning petitions for data centers until December 31st of 2027. And that process started in committee for us and then ultimately ended up in our full council meeting about 2 Mondays ago, where we passed that in our full council's final adoption. It finally went back to the Metropolitan Development Commission yesterday, which would have been Wednesday, August 19th. And it was their job to either accept our amendment or the city council's amendment that came over or deny it. They ultimately accepted it, which means until December 31st of 2027, no new petitions for data centers can be filed with the city of Indianapolis.
Now, this doesn't mean that petitions that have already been approved will be halted. It's just said going forward, no new petitions.
Exactly. So there are 3 projects in the works right now. I'm personally involved with one called DC Blocks. I think one of the bigger ones that have hit the news, not the biggest in size, has been the Metro Blocks. And then there's Saby down in Decatur. All 3 of those projects are still actively going through permitting. They're going through tax abatement conversations, incentive discussions. All of those things are still actively moving forward at this time.
Our guest on the program today is Michael Paul Hart, City County Council member, Republican. I wouldn't necessarily say a proponent, but he doesn't oppose data centers. But this week at the City County Council and the Metropolitan Development Commission, a moratorium was put on data centers until December of 2007 to this December 31st, 2007, which ironically is what, almost 2 months after the upcoming municipal election.
Exactly. Yeah. The timing is right after the election, right when a new council is going to be coming in. And, I heard you in that midterm there. One of the things that I want to, make folks aware of is, these developments are like any other type of development. There can be good ones and bad ones. And I've seen that in my district in the last 2 years. I've been on the opposition side of a data center development when Google tried to bring an opportunity to District 20. And it was just a bad deal for a handful of reasons, from the water usage to the financial impact to the physical impact on the community that was in. Now, on the other side of the coin, I've got one right now that's in a heavy industrial area. It's a closed loop water system, meaning it doesn't use any more water than what it's already filled up with, like a radiator in your car. And the finances are phenomenally good. And a lot of that money stays in District 20 to where, it's a really hard investment to say no to. So, I've been on both sides. I've said no to one and I've supported one. And I think that's the position that the city should have been taking when looking at these development types, is that putting a blanket statement like a moratorium and say all of them are bad is an irresponsible way to look at economic development for the city of Indianapolis.
What about a lot of councils say, look, we've been listening to our constituents. Our constituents don't want it. We're just basically putting a pause on everything so everybody can take a step back, to take a deep breath, and we can figure out what's right, what not only what's right for the city of Indianapolis, but also what's the right fit for the city of Indianapolis.
Yeah, and I got to remind folks, right? We've done that already, right? I mean, that was the first step that we spent, and the city spent a few months on, having public meetings. They had a consultant. They put all those things together. To me, it was a failure on the city's behalf of making that more public, that was going on. There's a group that comes out to these meetings over and over again, and you'll notice them because they're always in a red shirt and they're always yelling, most of the time yelling at the top of their lungs. And they don't want a moratorium, Abdul. They just want to ban data centers. And so what I try to remind people is that, there's individually, I've got 42,000 people in my council district. We see the same group of people over and over that are doing these oppositions. And I think it takes a lot more responsibility on the counselor to actually step back and say, well, hold on now. I'm noticing a pattern here. I've got to actually do what should be the harder decision, which is accept a set of development standards now. You can continue to work on them moving forward, which is what people are asking. If they're not right today, it doesn't stop us from continuing to make them better, those standards better. But what's also important to note is when you get a development that's coming to your district, you work with the community. And I've done that twice now on setting what are called development commitments. And those are recorded on the property. They live forever with the recorder's office. And those standards, those commitments can go above and beyond any development standards that are put in place essentially by the MDC or by the city county council combined. So even if there's something that a particular counselor doesn't see, or a group of citizens don't see that they want more restrictive, that opportunity is still there when a petition is coming through the MDC.
Has there been any, to the best of your knowledge, any sort of council surveys or polling or maybe council district surveys, to constituents? Do you support data centers? Do you support data centers with restrictions? Do you oppose data centers? Because I know at the legislature they do legislative surveys all the time. I don't know if anyone's done anything like this at the council level.
I think I've tried them and I get pretty low results. I had like 9 people, I think, respond to me, and I put out a newsletter to 5,000 people every week.
I know I'm one of them.
And I have anywhere between 500 and 700 readers, right? And so I know people are seeing it. And when I put mine out, I had like 9 people respond, right? I know Andy Nielsen put one out and he had, I think, a couple hundred people respond. And I'm sure, these data center companies are doing it, which we're not seeing their responses. So I know it's happening. Again, I know the city actually put out multiple when they were going through the fact-finding process of doing it through DMD, and then they hosted multiple events. Shoot, I've even met with constituents one-on-one, actually in group settings, and have taken their feedback and then brought that back to the city on interests of the community. So I'd say it's happening. Just like everything else, though, I mean, most people aren't looking at data center developments. Most people aren't looking at gas station developments either, right? And so that's where we as the elected officials have to come in and take the responsibility, take the time, look at the information, understand what is truth from fact. And I think that's a big part of this conversation is you can read whatever you want to read online, right? There's like anything else, there's good attorneys and there's bad attorneys, right? There's good doctors and there's bad doctors. And there's been good examples of data centers and bad examples of data centers. And if somebody's adamantly opposed to them, they can go online and find all the bad examples in the world. And that's what they'll see.
Our guest on the program today, Michael Paul Hart, Indianapolis City County Councilor, District 20, talking about the data center debate here in the city of Indianapolis. Not a good week for data centers, and so to speak. City County Council and the Metropolitan Development Commission both approved a moratorium on data centers until December 31 of 2027, which is about 7 weeks after the next municipal election, which say for that, folks, with what you will. So we're having this data center discussion. It seems to me, Michael, that for some strange reason, data centers have just become basically a four-letter word that you can throw data centers in front of anything and it's bad. But, hey, here's mom's apple pie. But that apple pie was made in a data center. We can't have it. Or hey, here's something that we can rescind the wheel tax if we have a data center. So what in your opinion has made data centers a pejorative?
Yeah, so I think the unknown part of it is what has made them that way. They're not new by any means, and having been around the technology for a long time, there was a similar wave of data centers like this when cloud computing was becoming very popular in like the early 2000s, when basically every large company, medium-sized company in the world has a small data center, right? I mean, that's where they're just keeping their data at the smallest level. So when cloud computing happened, they started, big companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft, they saw a business opportunity, right? They said, well, we're going to create data centers and then lease out the space to other companies that don't want to host their own hardware, right? They don't want to maintain their own data center. And that was the first, really hockey stick growth we saw, like I said, back in the early 2000s. And we had a very similar motion of data centers, but not to the extent of the pushback on them, right? Or at least I wasn't doing politics then, so I'm not sure if there was as much pushback or not. And so what happened, why that it kind of decreased a little bit, or the demand went down, is because people started realizing, well, it's a lot more expensive to pay for to pay for leased space on a data center than just host your own, right? Think of leasing a car versus buying a car, right? With the leased car space or the leased car, you're going to keep paying that lease in perpetuity until you go get a new one, right? If you buy a car, eventually you're going to own that asset and your costs will go down outside of any type of deferred maintenance, right? Very similar type of ownership models there. And here we are again now, where there was a new reason to build more functioning for data. And it's not just AI. I mean, AI is a very big accelerator of that, but so is everything else, right? I mean, people really enjoy downloading their favorite songs from Spotify or having them available at their fingertips at any minute, or going and doing the same thing with virtually any movie that's out there. All the medical records available to us outside of all the social media and things that exist. You can't do your daily life now without interacting with some sort of technology that has to use a data center. And so, think about ordering your groceries, right? Or ordering the last thing you got off of Amazon. All of that information is stored somewhere. And so, we as a society are a product of the demand of data centers, and that's the reality of it. And, I do think we get to a position eventually where our energy supply isn't capable of providing any more energy for data centers. So I think we hit, some roadblocks eventually, and then the conversation we may turn to is on nuclear energy versus anything else. But ultimately, we are the cause. We as consumers are the cause of the proliferation of data centers, and honestly, that's the way that I think we're going to continue to trend.
Michael Paul Hart with us for a few minutes on the program today. Michael, City County Councilor, District 20, the east side of town. A data center, I won't say proponent, but he doesn't oppose data centers, even though the City Council basically approved moratorium on data centers for the meanwhile. Michael, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the old cell phone tower debate back in the early 90s, back in the early to mid 90s, when talking about cell phone towers. People saying if you build a cell phone tower, I'll get radiation and my kid will have a third eye, blah, 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 blah. I'm seeing some parallels in this. And also, these sort of the wind and solar county moratoriums, 2015, 2022. People didn't like them. The ethanol wave of the mid 2000s. I I mean, you name it. What is it about new technology that just frightens people?
I think it's the unknown, honestly, at the end of the day. Even using I'll give you a couple examples, right? One of them, the water consumption, right? A lot of people think that and again, some of these things have probably happened in other places, right? So I'm not saying some of these examples have never happened, right? Because you wouldn't think of it if they hadn't. But now, where technology stands today, right? There's a thought that, well, they use all this water all the time, and there are some designs that do that, right? And that's why I was opposed to the Google data center, because it was going to use 4 million gallons of water a day, and I said absolutely not. There are better designs out there, like the closed loop. The noise conversation, right? That always seems to be another one that I hear when going through these conversations. And that's why site selection is so important, right? Don't put these right next to a residential neighborhood. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, and I'll keep using the two examples that I've just been part of here in the city over and over again, right? But like the Google one, if they're putting IKEA-sized buildings right next to houses or proposing it, that was a bad idea. Now, the one I was supportive of, it's in an I3 district, which is an industrial zone 3 district, which is classified for chemical use facilities, right? It's on the old Ford motor plant. There's scrap yards and metal coating facilities and semi-truck distribution centers in these same spaces, right? Okay, that building's not going to have as much as an impact. It's already noisy in that location. The other things are the diesel generators with folks. It's two things, right? It's the exhaust on them, but it's also the storage of the diesel gas. But on the same time, I've got a lot of trucking in District 20, and those are producing a lot more diesel exhaust than those generators that are really as backup, right? And so to me, it all boils down to knowledge, and it's what I think the problem is, which happens a lot, right? It happens with many things, is the attention that the news is going to get paid is when things are exciting and people are clicking on them, right? And so if headline reads something negative about data centers, folks are more likely going to go click and read about that. Same like where they give the phrase, if it bleeds, it reads, right? I mean, that's why crime is always the number one topic in news media. And that's what people are interested in reading. So that's, I think, why they have such a bad reputation right now, is because that's the level of knowledge, the level of understanding. And then the media has been able to find out that, look, if I phrase these headlines in a certain way, I get more clicks. The more clicks I get, the more we get paid. And that is just the truth of how I see it.
Michael Paul Hart, Indianapolis City County Council, with us on the program today. Mike, I want to change gears a little bit because this also just came up this week. And I know we hadn't planned to talk about it, but you're on the Public Safety Committee, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Because a big debate has started about flock cameras, the other new bit of technology that has gotten all the people rage and ticked off, saying it's violating the right to privacy. First of all, how does IMPD City of Indianapolis use flock cameras?
I'm glad you asked. So I actually had the opportunity. I did a ride along on July 31st with an IMPD officer from the hours of 8 p.m. till 2 a.m. in the downtown district. And that was actually one of the things I asked this officer as I'm riding around in his vehicle. I said, show me what flock looks like, right? Because I think a lot of us think, well, it's a camera and it's taking pictures of you. Well, what I wanted to see is I want to see what you see, Mr. Officer. And he showed me. And so he basically pulls up his laptop, and on it is an application that was opened up, and they were able to type in a license plate number and then show basically the traffic pattern of that vehicle. And I said, well, how do you use this type of information? And he said, well, what I do is when I know that I've got the time to go look for known felons that are out in Indianapolis, and I know their license plate number, and I'm out looking for somebody or looking for a particular vehicle, that's how he explained his use of it, is that he's typing in that and then trying to identify it if it's within his district. And so what could be seen actually on the application itself was just the license plate of the vehicle, and it was the back of the vehicle. You could not see inside of it. You couldn't see the driver. You couldn't see through the windows. You could only see the license plate, and then there was kind of like a heat map on overlay of the geography of where it had been. And so that's what my experience was actually looking at it, seeing it. I've heard mixed reviews from people on their opinion of it, both in my constituency and then in other parts of the city. I've certainly had people write me concerned about their privacy because of the cameras, but I've equally had people write me asking how they can get them installed in their neighborhoods because they've got people breaking into cars and they want to catch the people that are breaking in. And so I think it's another media thing, right? Where it's easy to talk about, easy to get clicks, but I think it is a nuanced conversation where we must respect people's privacy. Everybody does have a right to privacy, but it's also a nuanced conversation of how better can you protect the city of Indianapolis with it versus how much risk is being used at that same time.
And speaking of that nuanced conversation, and you're right, people do have a right to privacy. However, I want to say the rule is, I remember my old constitutional law class, it's where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. For example, if you're in your backyard, having a cookout or having a beer or just relaxing, and you got trees all around you, the government really you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. However, if you're, say, on a public street, and out in public, and anybody can see with their naked eye, is there really a reasonable expectation of privacy if you're out in public?
Yeah, and I'm not an attorney, so I'll take your word for it. But I mean, I think what you're getting at, right, is hey, you're out in the public, you're driving in a vehicle that has a registered identification plate on the back of it. Anybody can really take a picture of it at that point in time, and so by agreeing to, I guess the question is, by agreeing to, putting an identification plate on the back of your vehicle and driving around, are you giving up, a right to your privacy?
Michael Paul Hart with us on the program day. And Michael, I want to say also, there has been, like you said, there good data centers, bad data centers. There good lawyers, bad lawyers, also good police officers, and some police officers who are questionable. Because I know I've been seeing stories about some folks in law enforcement sort of using the flocks to to stalk people, like ex-girlfriends, ex-spouses, doing things that the flocks were not intended to be used for.
Certainly. And it's a tool, right? I mean, it's a tool like anything else. I mean, we also give them guns and tasers, right? And, we give them training on that and we expect them to use those tools in responsible ways. And like to your point, right? There's good and there's bad. And there was a recent news article about an individual officer who was using it in inappropriate ways. And, I'm grateful IMPD, took quick action, right? They terminated him immediately for doing that, which I think is a good example. But we do have to, remember that it's a tool and there's a lot of tools and, we've got to weed out the bad actors when we find them.
Have you heard from IMPD officers about Flock? What are their thoughts?
I mean, the one that I did ride with, he was supportive of it. He found it helpful in doing his investigative work and his trying to, keep Indianapolis safe. So, that was the one conversation. I did have a conversation with the chief of police on it, and her explanation was essentially the one that I just gave you about tools, right? That it is a tool and it needs to be used responsibly, just like the other tools that they're given. And I agree with that sentiment. It is a tool and it does need to be used responsibly, and people's right to privacy does need to be respected. So that's really the feedback I've gotten from at least those two levels of law enforcement.
Now, obviously, as an elected official, you want to do the right thing. You also want to communicate with your constituents. Has the conversation advanced far enough that you start hearing from constituents about flock cameras, or is it still in sort of those early phases?
Just a couple, right? Just where I was giving the example, right after I did the ride along, I put out my newsletter and somebody reached out to me and basically said, hey, here, please do a ride along in my neighborhood, right? And please send more officers over here. And then they sent me Ring cameras, right? Which I think is an interesting part of this conversation is, how many of the doorbell cameras are people putting on their house and what privacy is given up with that. But she was essentially asking, hey, come out here because look at all this video footage. And that's when she was asking me of, how can we get a flock camera in our neighborhood? And, I did some research with her, and it turns out if you have community cameras in your neighborhood, or I even think Ring cameras, you can connect those to the flock system. There's like a community flock database that any individual can share their camera feed with. So that's actually a pretty interesting piece of information I found out. But I have had another person write out to me, and he said, hey, we do need to put, or at least examine and see what we have out there in terms of responsibility trainings, ethical guidelines, and placement, and how those locations are placed. So I think it's worth a review on that. I do, take his input seriously, and I think those are some of the conversations that, given the feedback we've seen, because the media is only going to report if people are talking about it. We should have a conversation about the acceptable use, the privacy, the ethics, and the location placements based on, a particular set of criteria.
So let me ask you this, old friend, before I let you go here. Have there been any sort of flying flocks lately, as in drones and camera surveillance over neighborhoods to deal with crime, or maybe spot crime before it starts, or is that not a conversation, or is that too RoboCop of a conversation to have right now?
No, it's not. Again, I'll tell you two stories. So one, I know there are some level of drones today, and a lot of the times I know they're used in like special event scenarios when you have large groups of people. And essentially today they are manned by an officer that has been trained on it. They've got it basically in the trunk of their vehicle. They take it out, and then start flying it, and they can then see from it. But I had the opportunity to go to what's called the Rock, which is just a location where a lot of intel happens for IMPD. It's over here on the east side of Indianapolis, and they invited me out because they were testing some new technology, which was essentially drones that were controlled from behind your desk. Like I'm sitting behind my desk right now, I've got a keyboard and mouse, and I went to the police station, and I was sitting behind a computer monitor, and I was flying a drone somewhere in Indianapolis. And they basically showed me how they were able to identify an individual who had just shot at police and then was driving away, and then started running on foot, trying to blend in, and they could identify the person. The camera technology was that good, and show the weapon in the individual's pants, and then that helped direct police to that person. They ultimately caught that person, and he went to jail, at least before the prosecutor got to him.
All righty, we'll cover a lot of tech ground today. Whether we're going to talk about flight cameras or data centers, the whole nine yards. So, Michael, my friend, always good to chat with you, sir. If somebody wants to get it on your email list, where can they get a hold of you?
Certainly. Easy enough. michaelpaulhart.com. And as soon as you sign up, you'll get the newsletter every Sunday about 8 a.m.
All right, Michael, my friend, hey, thank you for being with us. Always good to chat with you, sir.
All right. Thank you.